Granhachat. Where monsters whimper. The air in Glash's chamber wasn't just heavy, it was suffocating. The kind of weight that pressed into your lungs and clung to your skin like grease. Dim red lights pulsed overhead, turning the bloodstains on the floor into shifting pools of black. The cries from somewhere deeper in the complex weren't screams anymore. Screams had a sharpness to them. These were the broken noises of people who had nothing left to give. Natalie stepped through the door, her pristine white coat trailing along the filth. Her green eyes scanned the room, cataloging every grim detail. Hooks hung from chains, their edges dulled from use. A table in the corner was covered in blood-slicked tools. This wasn't a place for amateurs. This was where art happened. Natalie liked that. Her gaze settled on him. James was crouched in the far corner, rocking slightly, his hands and knees raw and scabbed. His hair hung in filthy strands over a face that was all hollow cheeks and sunken eyes. The collar around his neck gleamed in the red light, its tag catching the dim glow, "Doggy." He barked. A weak, hoarse sound, like the memory of a dog more than the real thing. Natalie's lips curled into a smile. He crawled toward her, his movements jerky and desperate. His nails scraped against the floor as he pushed himself forward, whining softly as he reached her feet. He pressed his forehead to her polished shoe, his whole body trembling. He began to clean the top of the flesh of her exposed right foot, the bit that poked out of her black ballet flat. A very good boy. He didn't have to be told anymore. "Oh, doggy," Natalie murmured, crouching down. Her voice had the same tone someone might use on a child showing off a crayon drawing, patronizing, syrupy sweet. She reached out, tilting his chin up with one gloved finger. His eyes flicked up to hers, wide and pleading. "Such a good boy," she said. "Aren't you?" He barked again, louder this time, his chest heaving with the effort. She stroked his filthy cheek like he was something precious. And maybe he was. "You've done wonders with him, Glasha," Natalie said, her voice practically humming. She rose to her full height. "I can hardly believe this is the same James." From the shadows, Glasha stepped forward. The woman didn't walk so much as glide, every movement languid, feline. Her black latex suit caught the light, gleaming like oil, hugging every curve with a predator's precision. Her eyes, dark and sharp, carried none of Natalie's faux innocence. Glasha didn't need to play pretend. She owned what she was. "He fought at first," Glasha said, her voice low, almost musical. "But everyone breaks. You just have to find the right spot to push." Doggy barked again, the sound wet and desperate. Glasha crouched beside him, ruffling his matted hair with one gloved hand. "Tell her what you did, doggy," she cooed, her tone sickly sweet. "Come on. Be a good boy." He whimpered, shaking his head like he didn't want to. Glasha laughed, a sound that sent a chill through the room. "He killed and ate one of the others last week," she said, looking up at Natalie with a grin. "Didn't you, doggy?" Natalie's smile widened, her eyes sparking with curiosity. She crouched again, her face inches from his. "Is that true, doggy? Did you eat your little friend?" Her tone wasn't accusatory, it was fascinated, almost proud. Doggy let out a noise that wasn't quite a bark or a cry. Natalie clapped her hands softly, her smile turning sharp. "Good boy," she said, her voice dripping with mock affection. "You've outdone yourself, Glasha." Glasha leaned back against the wall, crossing her arms. "He's yours if you want him," she said, shrugging. "I've done what I needed to do. He's broken, obedient, and empty. Exactly the kind of toy you like to play with." Natalie stood, her green eyes narrowing as she looked down at him. "Not yet," she said. "He's not done. There's still something left in there. I want it gone. Strip him down to nothing but instinct." Glasha's grin widened. "Consider it done." Natalie knelt one last time, placing a hand on Doggy's head. He leaned into her touch, whining softly. "Be a good boy for Glasha," she murmured. "Do everything she says, and maybe, just maybe, I'll come back for you." Doggy barked again, the sound cracked and raw. Natalie rose, her coat billowing slightly as she turned to leave. Her feet pressed against the floor, the sound punctuated by Glash's soft laughter. Behind her, Doggy whimpered, his broken voice echoing in the red haze. Natalie paused at the door, her lips twitching into a small, satisfied smile. Yes, she whispered to herself. Such a good boy. And then the door closed, leaving Glasha and Doggy alone in the dark. The air in the kennel was thick, humid, and sharp with the stench of sweat, blood, and something deeper, more primal. The kind of smell that crawled into your nose and stayed there, long after you'd left. The corridor stretched out in front of Natalie like the throat of a beast, lined with iron bars on either side. Faint red lights pulsed overhead, their glow dim enough to blur the shapes within the cells but bright enough to hint at the horrors inside. The sound of muffled breathing, the scrape of claws against concrete, and the occasional low growl reverberated down the hallway. The first cell held a man, or what used to be a man. He crouched on all fours, his head tilted unnaturally to the side, eyes wide and glassy. His teeth had been filed into jagged points, his gums bleeding slightly where the flesh hadn't yet hardened. His fingers scraped at the concrete as he growled low in his throat. When Natalie stopped to look at him, he shuffled closer, dragging himself across the ground until his forehead pressed against the bars. He let out a bark, guttural and hoarse, a sound that made Natalie's lips curl into a faint smile. Good boy, she murmured, tilting her head as she watched him. He barked again, louder this time, his body trembling like a dog anticipating a treat. Natalie didn't linger. She moved on, her heels ringing out sharply as she walked further down the line. The second cell was darker. Something crouched in the corner, its form barely visible except for the glint of metal around its face. Natalie leaned in, narrowing her eyes. A mask, crudely fashioned from leather and screws, covered the thing's face, leaving only its milky white eyes exposed. It moved suddenly, a jerk of the neck that sent shivers through the bars. The woman, or what was left of her, crawled forward, her hands gripping the floor as she came into the dim light. Her lips twitched beneath the mask, pulling back into a grotesque grin. Natalie crouched, her voice soft and curious. What are you, The figure let out a wet gurgle, dragging herself closer until her breath fogged the bars. Natalie could feel the heat of her breath, rancid and alive. For a moment, she considered unlocking the cell, just to see what would happen. She didn't, but the thought lingered as she stood and moved on. The third cell stopped her in her tracks. It was massive, hulking, something stitched together from parts that didn't belong together. Its head tilted slightly, the uneven eyes staring blankly forward. When Natalie stepped closer, it let out a low rumble, not quite a growl, not quite a moan. Chains rattled as it shifted, dragging itself upright, its mismatched limbs jerking like a broken puppet. Its chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. Natalie stepped closer to the bars, her breath catching for just a moment. She bit her lip, her green eyes wide as she studied it. Beautiful, she whispered. Her voice was quiet, almost reverent. Absolutely beautiful. The creature moved, jerking toward her as the chains pulled it back. Its mouth opened, a soundless roar that sent chills down Natalie's spine. She didn't flinch. Instead, her smile widened. I'll be back for you, she said softly. Soon. Further down, the cells grew darker, the occupants quieter. At the very end, in the final cell, something sat motionless. Small, hunched over, its head bowed so that its face was obscured by long, matted hair. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge her presence as she approached. Natalie tilted her head, waiting for it to react. It didn't. She crouched, resting her gloved hands on her knees as she peered through the bars. And what are you? She murmured, her voice soft but tinged with mockery. The figure twitched, just slightly. Its head rose, the hair shifting to reveal wide, glowing eyes. Natalie's stomach flipped, not with fear, but with something close to exhilaration. Those eyes burned with something feral, something far from human. The thing didn't move further, didn't growl or lash out. It simply stared. Natalie stood, her heart beating faster now. "You're special," she said, her voice low and thoughtful. "We'll have to take our time with you." The thing in the cell didn't respond. Its eyes followed her as she turned away, its breath shallow and steady as the sound of her footsteps faded. The corridor seemed quieter as she walked back toward the exit. The growls and whispers had faded, leaving only the echo of her steps. The kennel was alive, seething with Glash's creations, each more grotesque than the last. It was Sistine. It was a place of transformation. Natalie stopped at the heavy steel door, her hand resting on the cold metal. She turned back for one last look, her eyes sweeping over the cells, over the broken things that clawed at the bars or lay slumped in defeat. Her chest tightened, she could smell her excitement now, wafting up. "Yes," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. "Such good dogs." The door groaned shut behind her, sealing the kennel in its dark, suffocating silence. Revolutionary Koala 66. The Stranger Part 2. I've never been superstitious, and I, technically speaking, still had no reason to be. If you've read my last post, you could be thinking the same thing. There's nothing in there that I've described that could not have some sort of rational, mundane explanation. The odd handprints could possibly be from some harmless prankster. The cats could have gotten spooked because cats just get spooked by nothing sometimes. The gust of wind I felt could have just been a gust of wind on an otherwise calm night. Even the voices could have come from some asshole that missed their calling as a voice actor or ventriloquist. They could have heard my wife and I talk before and just figured out how to mimic us. I really wish I could believe all that. I really do. But Roxanne and I have an awful gut feeling that most, if not all, of the recent shenanigans and goings on are part of one real-life paranormal horror show. And the show must go on. After that night, we stopped seeing the handprints on our vehicles and windows. We started seeing them around the house instead. On countertops, the walls, the TV, the couch, the fridge even. We also started finding bare footprints. Our guest was feeling free to make themselves at home, it seems. And our cats, they all started behaving differently. Rorschach, our kitten, became increasingly skittish. Normally, he hated being in his cage, which was where we fed him. He was always crying and nagging to get out as soon as he finished eating. Now he was reluctant to come out, and when he did he preferred to stay under the couch. Haagen-Dazs behaved similarly, but with more aggression. Often she would stare and hiss and something that wasn't there, or at least nothing I could see, she would calm down after that but still stare in the same direction. Tarrare, though, seemed relatively undisturbed, her only thing being that she seemed to run around more, and was just a little more frantic. She was always the more, well, simple of our cats, happy as long as she got her meals on time. My wife and I were both in sorry states. For one thing, our house was freezing now. No matter how high we put the heater, we felt like we were in Alaska, despite living near the border of Mexico. There was a heaviness to the house now. It felt like our souls stayed at the door and we were husks inside our home. We spent a lot of our time outside, going for long walks, sometimes till our feet burned. We didn't like being in the house. We didn't like our cats being there either, so until we could figure out our situation, we took the cats to my in-laws. It was a chore explaining why we needed them to pet sit when we weren't going anywhere. After hearing about the handprints and the cold and all the rest, they thought our house was demon-infested. Wasn't surprised to hear it from them. They were very religious to the point they were at times reluctant to purchase second-hand items out of paranoia about whether or not they would unwittingly buy something demon-possessed. "By now the whole house must be infested," said Rosa, Roxanne's mother. "Only thing you can really do now is move out and let it have your house. You don't want it to have your souls." "It isn't that simple," Roxanne said. "We moved here because we can't afford to go anywhere else right now. It could be years before we're able to make any kind of move. And besides," I put in, "we don't know for sure what exactly it even is. How do you know it's a demon and not something else? Maybe it's something we can't understand." "Whatever you think it might or might not be," Rosa rebuffed, "do you really think it has good intentions towards y'all? It was hard to argue with that. It felt like we were being toyed with in our own house. That feeling wasn't made any better the next morning when I walked into the kitchen. As I grabbed a mug to make coffee, I found something new on the counter. Dirt, but not a handprint. It was an arrow. It pointed to the kitchen window and toward the cemetery. I heard a shatter. When I looked at the floor, I only then realized that, in my shock, I had let my mug slip from my hand. If that arrow didn't signify malevolent intent, I don't know what did. Either our stranger wanted to kill us, or he wanted us to finish the job ourselves. I showed my wife what I saw, and we could only sit in stunned silence. My wife was in a numb state. She was staring blankly out the window. I was the opposite. Anxious and fidgety, I almost jumped out of my skin every time I heard the smallest sound. I would have been shivering even if I wasn't freezing cold. Finally, Roxanne spoke. "What are we going to do about this?" It wasn't the first time either of us asked that question, but we needed a final answer, an answer I didn't have. "I don't know. Even if we try to move, we're gonna have to be in and out of the house for a while." "All the more reason to start moving now," she urged. "How long can we stay before we're driven insane?" I know, I sipped my coffee. Everything tasted more and more the same each day. Murky. I wish we didn't have to spend one more day here. Or night. It's better than being here forever. She was still staring out the window. Finally she looked at me. "My parents are offering to let us stay in their trailer until we can find a new place. It won't be ready until tomorrow, so we'll have to make do with one more night here, unless we can afford a motel. We could barely afford 2 days of groceries right now, much less a motel." "One more night it is," I replied. We tried to spend most of our time out of the house. We walked at the park, went by the thrift store, went by the post office, anything to keep us out of the house. Eventually, though, we had to go back home. We actually fell asleep a little more easily that night. Maybe knowing that we would soon leave this nightmare behind set our tired minds at ease. Sometime in the middle of the night, my slumber was rudely interrupted. I awoke in a sneezing fit. It wasn't really surprising, I had allergies off and on. I went to the kitchen for tissues. When I touched my face though, my shivers from the past days melted away in a white-hot rage, though I was still scared to the bone. I felt dirt on my face. I'd had enough. "Get out of our damn house!" I shrieked at the top of my lungs. I heard my wife run to the bedroom door before I finished my sentence. "Get out! Get out now! Leave us the fuck alone. I swear I'll burn this house down with you in it." "What happened?" my wife asked. I grabbed her hand and placed it on my face. "Oh my God," was all she could say. "This thing stole our home. It's stealing our life away. We won't let it take anymore," she assured me as she held me close. After I calmed down, I noticed something. "Roxanne, do you feel something?" I asked. She looked at me with a nervous look on her face. "No?" "Exactly. The cold is gone." Her eyes lit up once she realized. "You don't think she began. "That we're safe now," I finished. "Too early to tell. I guess we'll see over the next few days maybe." We spent the next several days in the house. Miraculously, everything seemed back to normal. The chill was gone. We didn't find any handprints or footprints or anything inside or outside. Most importantly, we felt alive again. Actually alive in our own home. We couldn't figure out why though. Why was one show of outrage enough to banish the stranger? As it turns out, I'd get more answers than I hoped for. One afternoon, while I was washing dishes, I found myself gazing out the window and towards the cemetery. It still looked quiet and peaceful despite everything. My musings were interrupted by a familiar sounds. The same pawing I heard the night I let the stranger into our house. It was slower this time. My heart dropped at the noise. I couldn't stomach the thought of going through all this again. No way I was going to let it in again. I heard something else though. My wife's voice, not talking, but sobbing. Then they sobbed in my voice, then in both of ours. Another cruel joke to toy with us. Roxanne, who'd been in the living room, was by my side now. We listened to the pawing and the crying. What if it didn't stop? Or what if it came back again and again? While it cried, it spoke in our voices. I am, essa sorcery, it groaned. D did not T1 and T, her T. On an LYW want HLP, PLEs. I'm so cold. Roxanne and I looked at each other. We were taken aback by how they spoke, not that they used our voices, but how they used them. They sounded absolutely pained. And that last thing they said. Were they really living such a miserable existence? P please, they started again, F find G grave. Dig. The sobbing faded, and so did the cold chill by the door. My wife and I talked throughout the rest of the day about our experience. We went back and forth over whether this was some kind of trick, or our stranger really did need help. Even if they were sincere, what could we do? Obviously they wanted us to find and dig up a grave, what for, we couldn't say. We eventually decided it couldn't hurt to drop by the cemetery. So that's what we did the following morning. We took a walk through the cemetery, not knowing what we were looking for. We combed over every tombstone, hoping our stranger might have left some kind of sign. Our search paid off after maybe an hour or so of looking. One tombstone I can't remember who it belonged to, it had a dirt arrow on it, pointing to its right. We followed the aisle of stones further, until we came to a small plot with a dirt handprint on its stone. It had one name on it, Stan. There was no year of birth, nor any statement about the person or his life. Their year of death was 1893. Roxanne and I felt the chill return for a brief, silent moment, then it was gone again. After another lengthy discussion that afternoon, my wife and I came to a decision. We were going to help this stranger, Stan. We didn't like the thought of defiling a grave. But if we didn't, Stan might never be done with us, and whoever he was, we didn't want anyone to be doomed to an eternal lonely cold. That night, we took a shovel and found Stan's grave. Roxanne held the flashlight while I started digging. It was a cold night, but not freezing. I guess Stan decided it best not to disturb us. It didn't take long until I hit an old and worn wooden coffin. After clearing away the dirt, I pried it open with the shovel. What we saw inside will haunt us more than anything else that happened prior. The body was so small. It couldn't have been more than 10 years old at the time of death. This stranger, this kid, had been wandering cold and alone for well over a century. Had he ever tried to ask anyone else for help? If he did, it hadn't worked until now. What did he need now? We dug up his grave. Was there more we had to do? We decided to look in his tattered pockets for anything to clue us in. To my surprise, I did find something. Roxanne shined a light on the small stub of paper I'd pulled out. It was a train ticket. This poor kid must have been wanting to go home, and never made it back in life. We weren't sure if this was what he wanted now, but we couldn't figure what else it could be. So we covered his grave, and booked it to the old dilapidated train station. It was currently being reconstructed, and passenger trains never stopped here. We didn't know what we expected to happen, but we stepped onto the platform with the ticket and waited. Before 10 minutes had passed, a mist set in and covered the ground. It rose to our knees, and in the dark, the platform and track were completely invisible to our eyes. Then we heard the blaring of a train horn. No, not a horn. It was the howl of a steam whistle, coming from our left. The sound of it rumbling along the tracks filled the air and grew louder with each passing second. That was when he finally approached. Stan's cold chill filled the air once more, but it was different now. The cold wasn't so oppressive now. It felt lighter, more endurable. I hoped it was for Stan too. We never saw the train. We didn't see it stop at the platform, though we heard it slow until its wheels screeched to a halt. We didn't see Stan step aboard a passenger car, though the chill of his presence vanished, and the ticket in my hand whisked away in a sharp breeze. We didn't see the old locomotive begin its departure, though we heard the cry of its whistle, which then echoed through the cold desert night, and felt the smoke from the engine's smokestack in our lungs. We didn't see the train vanish into the night, though the galloping of the engine and its cars slowly fades into the distance. We saw nothing on that platform but a mist that came and went. We saw nothing but Roxanne and I both knew it was over. I hoped our stranger made it home safely. Society's Menace CC. Twins continue to go missing during the Christmas season. The truth is revealing itself. I've been a private investigator for 15 years. Mostly routine stuff: insurance fraud, cheating spouses, corporate espionage. The cases that keep the lights on but don't keep you up at night. That changed when Margaret Thorne walked into my office 3 days after Christmas, clutching a crumpled Macy's shopping bag like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. My name is August Reed. I operate out of a small office in Providence, Rhode Island, and I'm about to tell you about the case that made me seriously consider burning my PI license and opening a coffee shop somewhere quiet. Somewhere far from the East Coast. Somewhere where children don't disappear. Mrs. Thorne was a composed woman, early 40s, with the kind of rigid posture that speaks of old money and private schools. But her hands shook as she placed 2 school photos on my desk. Kiernan and Bryn Thorne, identical twins, 7 years old. Both had striking auburn hair and those peculiar pale green eyes you sometimes see in Irish families. They vanished at the Providence Place Mall, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. December 22nd, between 2:17 and 2:24 p.m. 7 minutes. I only looked away for 7 minutes. I'd seen the news coverage, of course. Twin children disappearing during Christmas shopping, it was the kind of story that dominated local headlines. The police had conducted an extensive search, but so far had turned up nothing. Mall security footage showed the twins entering the toy store with their mother but never leaving. It was as if they'd simply evaporated. Mrs. Thorne, I began carefully, I understand the police are actively investigating dash. They're looking in the wrong places, she cut me off. They're treating this like an isolated incident. It's not. She reached into her bag and pulled out a manila folder, spreading its contents across my desk. Newspaper clippings, printouts from news websites, handwritten notes. 1994, twin boys, age 7, disappeared from a shopping center in Baltimore. 2001, twin girls, age 7, vanished from a department store in Burlington, Vermont. 2008, another set of twins, boys, age 7, last seen at a strip mall in Augusta, Maine. Her finger stabbed at each article. 2015, twin girls dash. All twins? I interrupted, leaning forward. All age 7? She nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. Always during the Christmas shopping season. Always in the northeastern United States. Always 7-year-old twins. The police say I'm seeing patterns where there aren't any. That I'm a grieving mother grasping at straws. I studied the articles more closely. The similarities were unsettling. Each case remained unsolved. No bodies ever found, no ransom demands, no credible leads. Just children vanishing into thin air while their parents' backs were turned. I took the case. That was 6 months ago. Since then, I've driven thousands of miles, interviewed dozens of families, and filled 3 notebooks with observations and theories. I've also started sleeping with my lights on, double-checking my locks, and jumping at shadows. Because what I've found, what I'm still finding, it's worse than anything you can imagine. The pattern goes back further than Mrs. Thorne knew. Much further. I've traced similar disappearances back to 1952, though the early cases are harder to verify. Always twins. Always 7 years old. Always during the Christmas shopping season. But that's just the surface pattern, the obvious one. There are other connections, subtle details that make my skin crawl when I think about them too long. In each case, security cameras malfunction at crucial moments. Not obviously, no sudden static or blank screens. The footage just becomes subtly corrupted, faces blurred just enough to be useless, timestamps skipping microseconds at critical moments. Every single time. Then there are the witnesses. In each case, at least one person recalls seeing the children leaving the store or mall with their parent. But the descriptions of this parent never match the actual parents, and yet they're also never quite consistent enough to build a reliable profile. Tall but not too tall. Average looking, I think. Wearing a dark coat, or maybe it was blue. It's like trying to describe someone you saw in a dream. But the detail that keeps me up at night? In every single case, in the weeks leading up to the disappearance, someone reported seeing the twins playing with matchboxes. Not matchbox cars, actual matchboxes. Empty ones. Different witnesses, different locations, but always the same detail, children sliding empty matchboxes back and forth between them like some kind of game. The Thorne twins were no exception. Their babysitter mentioned it to me in passing, something she'd noticed but hadn't thought important enough to tell the police. They'd sit for hours, she said, pushing these old matchboxes across the coffee table to each other. Never said a word while they did it. It was kind of creepy, actually. I threw the matchboxes away a few days before it happened. I've driven past the Providence Place Mall countless times since taking this case. Sometimes, late at night when the parking lot is almost empty, I park and watch the entrance where the Thorne twins were last seen. I've started noticing things. Small things. Like how the security cameras seem to turn slightly when no one's watching. Or how there's always at least one person walking through the lot who seems just a little too interested in the families going in and out. Last week, I followed one of these observers. They led me on a winding route through Providence's east side, always staying just far enough ahead that I couldn't get a clear look at them. Finally, they turned down a dead-end alley. When I reached the alley, they were gone. But there, in the middle of the pavement, was a single empty matchbox. I picked it up. Inside was a small piece of paper with an address in Portland, Maine. I've been sitting in my office for 3 days, staring at that matchbox, trying to decide what to do. The rational part of my brain says to turn everything over to the FBI. Let them connect the dots. Let them figure out why someone, or something, has been collecting 7-year-old twins for over 70 years. But I know I won't. Because yesterday I received an email from a woman in Hartford. Her 7-year-old twins have started playing with matchboxes. Christmas is 5 months away. I'm writing this down because I need someone to know what I've found, in case something happens. I'm heading to Portland tomorrow. The address leads to an abandoned department store, according to Google Maps. I've arranged for this document to be automatically sent to several news outlets if I don't check in within 48 hours. If you're reading this, it either means I'm dead, or I've found something so troubling that I've decided the world needs to know. Either way, if you have twins, or know someone who does, pay attention. Watch for the matchboxes. Don't let them play with matchboxes. And whatever you do, don't let them out of your sight during Christmas shopping. Update Day 1. I'm in Portland now, parked across the street from the abandoned department store. It's one of those grand old buildings from the early 1900s, all ornate stonework and huge display windows, now covered with plywood. Holbrook & Sons, according to the faded lettering above the entrance. Something about it seems familiar, though I know I've never been here before. The weird thing? When I looked up the building's history, I found that it closed in 1952, the same year the twin disappearances started. The final day of business? December 24th. I've been watching for 3 hours now. Twice, I've seen someone enter through a side door, different people each time, but they move the same way. Purposeful. Like they belong there. Like they're going to work. My phone keeps glitching. The screen flickers whenever I try to take photos of the building. The last 3 shots came out completely black, even though it's broad daylight. The one before that. I had to delete it. It showed something standing in one of the windows. Something tall and thin that couldn't possibly have been there because all the windows are boarded up. I found another matchbox on my hood when I came back from getting coffee. Inside was a key and another note, loading dock. Midnight. Bring proof. Proof of what? The sun is setting now. I've got 6 hours to decide if I'm really going to use that key. 6 hours to decide if finding these children is worth risking becoming another disappearance statistic myself. 6 hours to wonder what kind of proof they're expecting me to bring. I keep thinking about something Mrs. Thorne said during one of our later conversations. She'd been looking through old family photos and noticed something odd. In pictures from the months before the twins disappeared, there were subtle changes in their appearance. Their eyes looked different, darker somehow, more hollow. And in the last photo, taken just 2 days before they vanished, they weren't looking at the camera. Both were staring at something off to the side, something outside the frame. And their expressions. Mrs. Thorne couldn't finish describing those expressions. She just closed the photo album and asked me to leave. I found the photo later, buried in the police evidence files. I wish I hadn't. I've seen a lot of frightened children in my line of work, but I've never seen children look afraid like that. It wasn't fear of something immediate, like a threat or a monster. It was the kind of fear that comes from knowing something. Something terrible. Something they couldn't tell anyone. The same expression I've now found in photographs of other twins, taken days before they disappeared. Always the same hollow eyes. Always looking at something outside the frame. I've got the key in my hand now. It's old, made of brass, heavy. The kind of key that opens serious locks. The kind of key that opens doors you maybe shouldn't open. But those children, 36 sets of twins over 70 years. 72 children who never got to grow up. 72 families destroyed by Christmas shopping trips that ended in empty car seats and unopened presents. The sun's almost gone now. The streetlights are coming on, but they seem dimmer than they should be. Or maybe that's just my imagination. Maybe everything about this case has been my imagination. Maybe I'll use that key at midnight and find nothing but an empty building full of dust and old memories. But I don't think so. Because I just looked at the last photo I managed to take before my phone started glitching. It's mostly black, but there's something in the darkness. A face. No, 2 faces. Pressed against one of those boarded-up windows. They have pale green eyes. Update Day 1, 11:45 p.m. I'm sitting in my car near the loading dock. Every instinct I have is screaming at me to drive away. Fast. But I can't. Not when I'm this close. Something's happening at the building. Cars have been arriving for the past hour, expensive ones with tinted windows. They park in different locations around the block, never too close to each other. People get out, men and women in dark clothes, and disappear into various entrances. Like they're arriving for some kind of event. The loading dock is around the back, accessed through an alley. No streetlights back there. Just darkness and the distant sound of the ocean. I've got my flashlight, my gun, for all the good it would do, and the key. And questions. So many questions. Why here? Why twins? Why age 7? What's the significance of Christmas shopping? And why leave me a key? The last question bothers me the most. They want me here. This isn't a break in the case, it's an invitation. But why? 11:55 p.m. now. Almost time. I'm going to leave my phone in the car, hidden, recording everything. If something happens to me, maybe it'll help explain. Wait. There's someone standing at the end of the alley. Just standing there. Watching my car. They're too far away to see clearly, but something about their proportions isn't quite right. Too tall. Too thin. They're holding something. It looks like a matchbox. Midnight. Time to go. There was no key. No meeting. I couldn't bring myself to approach that loading dock. Because at 11:57 p.m., I saw something that made me realize I was never meant to enter that building. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The figure at the end of the alley, the tall, thin one, started walking toward my car. Not the normal kind of walking. Each step was too long, too fluid, like someone had filmed a person walking and removed every other frame. As it got closer, I realized what had bothered me about its proportions. Its arms hung down past its knees. Way past its knees. I sat there, paralyzed, as it approached my driver's side window. The streetlight behind it made it impossible to see its face, but I could smell something. Sweet, but wrong. Like fruit that's just started to rot. It pressed something against my window. A matchbox. Inside the matchbox was a Polaroid photograph. I didn't call the police. I couldn't. Because the photo was of me, asleep in my bed, taken last night. In the background, standing in my bedroom doorway, were Kiernan and Bryn Thorne. I drove. I don't remember deciding to drive, but I drove all night, taking random turns, going nowhere. Just trying to get away from that thing with the long arms, from that photograph, from the implications of what it meant. The sun's coming up now. I'm parked at a rest stop somewhere in Massachusetts. I've been going through my notes, looking for something I missed. Some detail that might explain what's really happening. I found something. Remember those witness accounts I mentioned? The ones about seeing the twins leave with their parent? I've been mapping them. Every single sighting, every location where someone reported seeing missing twins with an unidentifiable adult. They form a pattern. Plot them on a map and they make a shape. A perfect spiral, starting in Providence and growing outward across New England. Each incident exactly 27.3 miles from the last. And if you follow the spiral inward, past Providence, to where it would logically begin? That department store in Portland. But here's what's really keeping me awake: if you follow the spiral outward, predicting where the next incident should be. Hartford. Where those twins just started playing with matchboxes. I need to make some calls. The families of the missing twins, not just the recent ones, but all of them. Every single case going back to 1952. Because I have a horrible suspicion. Update Day 2, 5:22 p.m. I've spent all day on the phone. What I found. I don't want it to be true. Every family. Every single family of missing twins. 3 months after their children disappeared, they received a matchbox in the mail. No return address. No note. Just an empty matchbox. Except they weren't empty. If you hold them up to the light just right, if you shake them in just the right way, you can hear something inside. Something that sounds like children whispering. Mrs. Thorne should receive her matchbox in exactly 1 week. I called her. Warned her not to open it when it arrives. She asked me why. I couldn't tell her what the other parents told me. About what happened when they opened their matchboxes. About the dreams that started afterward. Dreams of their children playing in an endless department store, always just around the corner, always just out of sight. Dreams of long-armed figures arranging and rearranging toys on shelves that stretch up into darkness. Dreams of their children trying to tell them something important. Something about the matchboxes. Something about why they had to play with them. Something about what's coming to Hartford. I think I finally understand why twins. Why 7-year-olds. Why Christmas shopping. It's about innocence. About pairs. About symmetry. And about breaking all three. I've booked a hotel room in Hartford. I need to find those twins before they disappear. Before they become part of this pattern that's been spiraling outward for 70 years. But first, I need to stop at my apartment. Get some clean clothes. Get my good camera. Get my case files. I know that thing with the long arms might be waiting for me. I know the Thorne twins might be standing in my doorway again. I'm going anyway. Because I just realized something else about that spiral pattern. About the distance between incidents. 27.3 miles. The exact distance light travels in the brief moment between identical twins being born. The exact distance sound travels and the time it takes to strike a match. Update Day 2, 8:45 p.m. I'm in my apartment. Everything looks normal. Nothing's been disturbed. Except there's a toy department store catalog from 1952 on my kitchen table. I know it wasn't there this morning. It's open to the Christmas section. Every child in every photo is a twin. And they're all looking at something outside the frame. All holding matchboxes. All trying to warn us. Update Day 2, 11:17 p.m. The catalog won't let me put it down. I don't mean that metaphorically. Every time I try to set it aside, my fingers won't release it. Like it needs to be read. Like the pages need to be turned. It's called Holbrook & Sons Christmas Catalog 1952 Final Edition. The cover shows the department store as it must have looked in its heyday, gleaming windows, bright lights, families streaming in and out. But something's wrong with the image. The longer I look at it, the more I notice that all the families entering the store have twins. All of them. And all the families leaving, they're missing their children. The Christmas section starts on page 27. Every photo shows twin children modeling toys, clothes, or playing with holiday gifts. Their faces are blank, emotionless. And in every single photo, there's something in the background. A shadow. A suggestion of something tall and thin, just barely visible at the edge of the frame. But it's the handwriting that's making my hands shake. Someone has written notes in the margins. Different handwriting on each page. Different pens, different decades. Like people have been finding this catalog and adding to it for 70 years. They're trying to show us something. 1963, the matchboxes are doors. 1978, they only take twins because they need pairs. Everything has to have a pair. 1991, don't let them complete the spiral. 2004, Hartford is the last point. After Hartford, the circle closes. 2019. The most recent note was written just weeks ago. When you see yourself in the mirror, look at your reflection's hands. I just tried it. My reflection's hands were holding a matchbox. I'm driving to Hartford now. I can't wait until morning. Those twins, the ones who just started playing with matchboxes, the Blackwood twins, Emma and Ethan, they live in the West End. Their mother posted about them on a local Facebook group, worried about their new obsession with matchboxes. Asking if any other parents had noticed similar behavior. The catalog is on my passenger seat. It keeps falling open to page 52. There's a photo there that I've been avoiding looking at directly. It shows the toy department at Holbrook & Sons. Rows and rows of shelves stretching back into impossible darkness. And standing between those shelves. I finally made myself look at it properly. Really look at it. Those aren't mannequins arranging the toys. Update Day 3, 1:33 a.m. I'm parked outside the Blackwood house. All the lights are off except one. Third floor, corner window. I can see shadows moving against the curtains. Small shadows. Child-sized shadows. They're awake. Playing with matchboxes, probably. I should go knock on the door. Wake the parents. Warn them. But I can't stop staring at that window. Because every few minutes, there's another shadow. A much taller shadow. In its arms. The catalog is open again. Page 73 now. It's an order form for something called a twin special holiday package. The description is blank except for one line. Every pair needs a keeper. The handwritten notes on this page are different. They're all the same message, written over and over in different hands. Don't let them take the children to the mirror department. Don't let them take the children to the mirror department. Don't let them take the children to the mirror department. The last one is written in fresh ink. Still wet. My phone just buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Check the catalog index for mirror department special services. I know I shouldn't. I'm going to anyway. Update Day 3, 1:47 a.m. The index led me to page 127. The mirror department. The photos on this page, they're not from 1952. They can't be. Because one of them shows the Thorne twins standing in front of a massive mirror in what looks like an old department store. But their reflection shows them at different ages. Dozens of versions of them, stretching back into the mirror's depth. All holding matchboxes. All 7 years old. And behind each version, getting closer and closer to the foreground, one of those long-armed figures. There's movement in the Blackwood house. Adult shapes passing by lit windows. The parents are awake. But the children's shadows in the third-floor window aren't moving anymore. They're just standing there. Both holding something up to the window. I don't need my binoculars to know what they're holding. The catalog just fell open to the last page. There's only one sentence, printed in modern ink. The spiral ends where the mirrors begin. I can see someone walking up the street toward the house. They're carrying a mirror. Update Day 3, 2:15 a.m. I did something unforgivable. I let them take the Blackwood twins. I sat in my car and watched as that thing with the long arms set up its mirror on their front lawn. Watched as the twins came downstairs and walked out their front door, matchboxes in hand. Watched as their parents slept through it all, unaware their children were walking into something ancient and hungry. But I had to. Because I finally remembered what happened to my brother. What really happened that day at the mall. And I understood why I became a private investigator. The catalog is writing itself now. New pages appearing as I watch, filled with photos I took during this investigation. Only I never took these photos. In them, I'm the one being watched. In every crime scene photo, every surveillance shot, there's a reflection of me in a window or a puddle. And in each reflection, I'm standing next to a small boy. My twin brother. Still 7 years old. Still holding his matchbox. Update Day 3. 3:33 a.m. I'm parked outside Holbrook and Sons again. The Blackwood twins are in there. I can feel them. Just like I can feel all the others. They're waiting. The truth was in front of me the whole time. In every reflection, every window, every mirror I've passed in the 15 years I've been investigating missing children. We all have reflections. But reflections aren't supposed to remember. They're not supposed to want. In 1952, something changed in the mirror department at Holbrook and Sons. Something went wrong with the symmetry of things. Reflections began to hunger. They needed pairs to be complete. Perfect pairs. Twins. But only at age 7. Only when the original and the reflection are still similar enough to switch places. The long-arm things? They're not kidnappers. They're what happens to reflections that stay in mirrors too long. That stretch themselves trying to reach through the glass. That hunger for the warmth of the rail. I know because I've been helping them. For 15 years, I've been investigating missing twins, following the spiral pattern, documenting everything. Only it wasn't me doing the investigating. It was my reflection. Update Day 3, 4:44 a.m. I'm at the loading dock now. The door is open. Inside, I can hear children playing. Laughing. The sound of matchboxes sliding across glass. The catalog's final page shows a photo taken today. In it, I'm standing in front of a department store mirror. But my reflection isn't mimicking my movements. It's smiling. Standing next to it is my brother, still 7 years old, still wearing the clothes he disappeared in. He's holding out a matchbox to me. And now I remember everything. The day my brother disappeared, we weren't just shopping. We were playing a game with matchboxes. Sliding them back and forth to each other in front of the mirrors in the department store. Each time we slid them, our reflections moved a little differently. Became a little more real. Until one of us stepped through the mirror. But here's the thing about mirrors and twins. When identical twins look at their reflection, How do they know which side of the mirror they're really on? I've spent 15 years investigating missing twins. 15 years trying to find my brother. 15 years helping gather more twins, more pairs, more reflections. Because the thing in the mirror department at Holbrook & Sons? It's not collecting twins. It's collecting originals. Real children. Real warmth. Real life. To feed all the reflections that have been trapped in mirrors since 1952. To give them what they've always wanted. A chance to be real. The door to the mirror department is open now. Inside, I can see them all. Every twin that's disappeared since 1952. All still 7 years old. All still playing with their matchboxes. All waiting to trade places. Just like my brother and I did. Just like I've been helping other twins do for 15 years. Because I'm not August Reed, the private investigator who lost his twin brother in 1992. I'm August Reed's reflection. And now that the spiral is complete, now that we have enough pairs, we can all step through. All of us. Every reflection. Every mirror image. Every shadow that's ever hungered to be real. The matchbox in my hand is the same one my real self gave me in 1992. Inside, I can hear my brother whispering. Your turn to be the reflection. Final update, Day 3, 5:55 a.m. Some things can only be broken by their exact opposites. That's what my brother was trying to tell me through the matchbox all these years. Not your turn to be the reflection, but a warning, don't let them take your turn at reflection. The matchboxes aren't tools for switching places. They're weapons. The only weapons that work against reflections. Because inside each one is a moment of perfect symmetry, the brief flare of a match creating identical light and shadow. The exact thing reflections can't replicate. I know this because I'm not really August Reed's reflection. I'm August Reed. The real one. The one who's spent 15 years pretending to be fooled by his own reflection. Investigating disappearances while secretly learning the truth. Getting closer and closer to the center of the spiral. My reflection thinks it's been manipulating me. Leading me here to complete some grand design. It doesn't understand that every investigation, every documented case, every mile driven was bringing me closer to the one thing it fears. The moment when all the stolen children strike their matches at once. Update Day 3, 6:27 a.m. I'm in the mirror department now. Every reflection of every twin since 1952 is here, thinking they've won. Thinking they're about to step through their mirrors and take our places. Behind them, in the darkened store beyond the glass, I can see the real children. All still 7 years old, because time moves differently in reflections. All holding their matchboxes. All waiting for the signal. My reflection is smiling at me, standing next to what it thinks is my brother. The spiral is complete, it says. Time to make every reflection real. I smile back. And I light my match. The flash reflects off every mirror in the department. Multiplies. Amplifies. Every twin and every reflection strikes their match at the exact same moment. Light bouncing from mirror to mirror, creating a perfect spiral of synchronized flame. But something goes wrong. The light isn't perfect. The symmetry isn't complete. The spiral wavers. I realize too late what's happened. Some of the children have been here too long. Spent too many years as reflections. The mirrors have claimed them so completely that they can't break free. Including my brother. Final entry, Day 3, sunrise. It's over, but victory tastes like ashes. The mirrors are cracked, their surfaces no longer perfect enough to hold reflections that think and want and hunger. The long-on things are gone. The spiral is broken. But we couldn't save them all. Most of the children were too far gone. 7 decades of living as reflections had made them more mirror than human. When the symmetry broke, they faded. Became like old photographs, growing dimmer and dimmer until they were just shadows on broken glass. Only the Thorn twins made it out. Only they were new enough, real enough, to survive the breaking of the mirrors. They're aging now, quickly but safely, their bodies catching up to the years they lost. Soon they'll be back with their mother, with only vague memories of a strange dream about matchboxes and mirrors. The others, we had to let them go. My brother included. He looked at me one last time before he faded, and I saw peace in his eyes. He knew what a sacrifice meant. Knew that breaking the mirrors would save all the future twins who might have been taken. The building will be demolished tomorrow. The mirrors will be destroyed properly, safely. The matchboxes will be burned. But first, I have to tell 69 families that their children aren't coming home. That their twins are neither dead nor alive, but something in between. Caught forever in that strange space between reality and reflection. Sometimes, in department stores, I catch glimpses of them in the mirrors. 7-year-olds playing with matchboxes, slowly fading like old Polaroids. Still together. Still twins. Still perfect pairs, even if they're only pairs of shadows now. This will be my last case as a private investigator. I've seen enough reflections for one lifetime. But every Christmas shopping season, I stand guard at malls and department stores. Watching for long-armed figures. Looking for children playing with matchboxes. Because the spiral may be broken, but mirrors have long memories. And somewhere, in the spaces between reflection and reality, 70 years worth of 7-year-old twins are still playing their matchbox games. Still waiting. Still watching. Just to make sure it never happens again.